What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Modern video. And after 2 days and 16 rounds of Magic from some of the best players in the world, we finally have our top 8 bracket. If you haven't seen the day 1 or day 2 recap videos that I have posted on those respective days, go ahead and check those out. They'll kind of give you a nice little lead up and some information going into this top 8. And for today, we're going to be looking at every match that was played out, all the quarterfinals matches, the semifinals, and the finals. We're going to break down the individual games, what exactly happened, who won those games, and then ultimately who won the Pro Tour, and again, kind of give my thoughts and feelings after each individual match, watching them play out, and then of course give some in general overall thoughts of the event as a whole, and kind of the state of the Modern format going forward. But of course, before we get deep into all of that information, you know, when we talk all things Modern Horizons 3 at the Pro Tour, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where I do a lot of videos pertaining to the Modern and Pioneer format, you know, be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell, as those are free, easy ways to support me and my content, and of course to be notified when those videos get uploaded. We're still going for 1,000 subscribers. That is never going to change. And again, you know, I can't say it enough, really. Like, all the support that the videos have gotten over the last few days has been absolutely amazing, and I, you know, very much appreciate it. And I look forward to, you know, getting to do this again in the future, because this is something new that I did for this Pro Tour specifically, and I'm going to be looking to do it for Worlds as well, and kind of just doing it going forward, because it has been very enjoyable for me to do it. So we're going to go ahead and go through the individual matches. The quarterfinals are going to have a little bit of an asterisk, because Jason Yee, Sam Pardee, we came in at Game 3, so we only ended up getting to watch the sideboarded games. And then the Ma, Noah, and Daniel match, the Mono Black Necro versus 4-color Nadu, we call it like the last few turns of that game. Very unfortunate, because I definitely remember, you know, back in my day, you know, we would basically have the top 8 last as long as the previous rounds of the, or I guess the previous days of the event, just because you would watch every single quarterfinals match. You were not missing anything from any of them. Of course, the semifinals as well. So, but with that said, you know, let's go ahead and take a look at our first match, which is Javier Dominguez versus Simon Nielsen, Jeskai Control versus Bant Nadu. So we have Javier versus Simon Nielsen, Jeskai Control versus Bant Nadu, and the Nadu deck is going to be one that we're going to be very familiar with, as there are 5 copies in the top 8, with 4 of them being the Bant variant. So Bant Nadu is essentially trying to assemble Nadu with some creatures in play along with a Shuko, and then you're able to just constantly target them with Shuko to then trigger the Nadu, and hoping to then find Springheart and Antuku, which can make creatures, which then means that, you know, as you kind of like flip through your deck, you're going to play more lands, and you're eventually going to get to a spot where with like Sylvan Safekeeper and Endurance, you're going to be able to put an amount of lands into your deck. You're going to continue to make 1/1s. You're going to be able to like put a Springheart and Antuku on an Endurance, and then continually cycle through your deck, leaving a Boseiju and a Otawara in your deck, so then you can blow up all your opponent's lands and bounce all their permanents, and, you know, pass the turn with a board full of Endurances. So that's typically how these decks have been winning. They went away from playing the Thassa's Oracle, just because it turns out you don't need it. You have a way better way that technically wins you the game, and that your opponent really can't meaningfully interact with. You know, just being the fact that when you get to that point, you know, you're already past the point of no return. Like, you're just basically guaranteed to almost win from that point. So that's Bant Nadu. Jeskai Control is kind of like our typical control decks, in the sense that the style of play is sort of kind of the same, just with the introduction of these energy cards from Modern Horizons 3, where you just get some very efficient removal spells in red, along with Flage just being able to also do kind of the same thing, interact with Planeswalkers, be able to go to your opponent's face, deal with creatures on the board, and then eventually comes back later. So it kind of plays double duty, where it is a win condition on top of also being like this removal spell that is very powerful in the deck. Wrath of the Skies has been pretty good, honestly. The fact that, you know, with all these other energy cards, where you just kind of, you know, play these things, you end up like killing a small creature, you net 2 energy, and then you like draw a card with the Tune with Aether card, and then, you know, at that point you're able to Wrath the Skies for, you know, 3 energy. You still have an energy left over, and you spent 2 mana to cast your Wrath. where then you're able to leave up something like a counter spell or maybe like another removal spell, or even go into playing something like a Flage or even the One Ring. So just kind of like what you would expect from a control deck, only instead with Javier, being the former world champion and just overall being a very, very, very good Magic player, and Jeskai Control theoretically having a very good Nadu matchup. I went into this thinking that Jeskai Control could potentially take down the event, at least could knock out one Nadu deck in the top 8. So here's how the matches ended up going. Games 1 and 2, Javier did the control thing, took over the game with One Ring and being able to route the board. Simon really couldn't establish a board state of any kind, and of course, once it got to the point where Javier had a bunch of rings going and then, ended up drawing a bunch of cards and then playing another ring and just kind of getting to keep the protection going while also just making sure that Simon could never get anything really productive added to the board, getting all of his key spells countered. Javier very quickly went up 2-0 on Nadu, and was really from that point on looked like Jeskai Control could end up taking the whole tournament. And just kind of reference our bracket here. I mean, basically Javier is going to play against either Necro or 4-color Nadu on the other part of their side of the bracket. So either you're going to play against a 4-color Nadu deck, which currently you're 2-0 against Bant Nadu, and you're going to presumably just end up sweeping at that point. And then having to play against either 4-color or Necro, and I'm assuming the Necro matchup has to at least be relatively decent. If you can just keep a Necro off the battlefield, the mono black decks just kind of look a little anemic, to say the least. So Javier is quickly up 2-0 on Simon Nielsen as we go into the sideboarded games. We get to game 3, and basically the Jeskai deck ends up kind of beating itself in a way. Javier misses land drops and can't get to Supreme Verdict before Bristly Bill and his friends end up swinging for game. We actually saw counters get put on like Bristly Bill and another creature, and then actually an activation from Bristly Bill to double the counters on your creatures to then end up swinging for game and knocking Javier Dominguez in one of the sideboard games. So from this point on, Javier is now going to get to be on the play for these games. Simon's down 2-1. This is already a bad matchup for the Nadu decks. And again, Javier just gets to be on the play for game 4 and a game 5 if necessary. So game 4, there's a little bit of controversy that happens. So we play out our game and everything. Javier gets to a point where he pays 4 mana and plays a One Ring. Simple, easy stuff. That's basically what control decks have been doing since the One Ring has been printed. Activate the rings, draw the card, pass the turn. Simon, then on his turn, ends up playing a Haywire Mite, and then using the Haywire Mite to get rid of the ring. We sit, we tank, we think about some things, and then a Cleanser ends up coming into play and targeting Javier and removing all of his energy counters, and then now he cannot gain energy counters for as long as this card is on the battlefield. The only problem is Javier had protection from the One Ring, and as I found out, and has been the case for a while, basically that you don't have to acknowledge the protection of the ring when you cast it. It basically just, I guess, whenever it's relevant, which doesn't seem to make any sense, but you also have to play as if you have the protection and everything like that. And essentially because of that misstep, Javier doesn't catch it. And I don't think the players ever really catch it at any point either during that match, or during that game, excuse me. So by the time, we would be able to catch it and possibly rewind, Simon has already taken quite a bit of his turn and we're into Javier's turn. So it just kind of plays where it lies at that point. And I think people in coverage too didn't really catch it until, going to Javier's next turn, and we've already done and taken a lot of different game actions. So, at this point, Javier is essentially looking for Supreme Verdict to then unlock those energy cards to then be able to, again, continue to control the board and then eventually find a way to win the game, and is just unable to do so after drawing tons of cards with the One Ring, and even being able to use Manamo as well to untap it and draw even more cards, is just unable to find Supreme Verdict, ends up losing game 4 to Simon Nielsen. Okay. Again, no big deal. Gets to be on the play for game 5. Again, you won 2 pre-boarded games, and really like game 3 you ended up losing because you didn't draw lands, and game 4 between kind of like a little bit of a mistake from Simon. Well, I guess not even really a mistake from him, but a mistake from Javier, not acknowledging the protection with the One Ring when the cleanser did target him and everything like that. When it could not, it technically do so. We're in game 5. You're on the play. Again, you've beaten yourself. Essentially, like, I consider Javier being 4-0 at this point, just from, making mistakes or just having kind of like bad things happen to him, where it's like he hits a land drop in game 3, more than likely wins game 3, acknowledges that Sun Cleanser cannot in fact target him, and then possibly is in at least a very good position to win game 4. So we get to game 5. Javier again is on the play, and Simon gets down Cleanser again, does the same thing, and while Javier is chaining One Rings to again dig for Supreme Verdict and everything, against Simon's stack board, just is unable to kind of beat the aggressive draw from him. Just even chaining rings and stuff doesn't help, anything like that. And Javier then falls to Simon Nielsen. 3-2, Bant Nadu winning 1 of 3 non-Nadu mirrors in the top 8. Overall, the game just felt very sloppy, and it was kind of good, kind of as we went on and played other games, that this ended up being kind of the sloppiest game that was played. Just again from Simon making plays that technically couldn't have been done, to Javier allowing plays that should not have happened. On top of that too, there was also a sequence where Simon cast an uncounterable Teferi Time Raveler off of a Delighted Halfling, and then Javier goes to force a negation it instead of casting Subtlety on said Teferi, for then Simon to respond with a Veil of Summer to, acknowledging the fact that, like, my spell can't be countered. So just kind of weird things like that, especially from two players like Simon Nielsen, who has been in countless top 8s at this point, and is firmly ahead of everybody in the Player of the Year race. And Javier Dominguez being a former world champion, and I believe they said in the last, 5 Pro Tours that Javier has played, his worst finish was 10th place. Which, again, basically puts Javier in the same kind of vein as Simon Nielsen, who's in the top 8s of all these events, and really only had maybe one technically bad one where he didn't top 8 Pro Tour Outlaws of Thunder Junction. But nonetheless, the match just felt very sloppy. It was kind of interesting to watch the match because it was going to be a non-mirror match, but did not play out the way that I thought it would in the last 3 games. And Simon Nielsen ended up taking down. Nonetheless, a win's a win, no matter how you get it. Whether, it's good play, bad play, whatever. Simon ends up taking it down and moving on to the semifinals. The next match that we got was, I believe it was Elie Cassis and Seth Manfield in their top 8 match. And that one we actually got to watch the full match kind of take place. So let's go ahead and talk about the Nadu matchup versus the Mono Black Necro matchup. So Mono Black Necro is the other deck that is in the top 8 with 2 copies, and Noah Ma being the top 8, or excuse me, being the number 1 seed and being the first person to actually qualify for the top 8. But this Mono Black Necro deck essentially is like a Mono Black scam-ish deck. We have kind of starts where you can go, turn 1 Grief and then Not Dead After All, some effect to be able to double up on those triggers, to double Thought Seize your opponent, and then kind of be able to gas back up with something like a Necro Dominance. And then with the combination of things like Soul Spike and March of Wretched Sorrow, you're able to draw, tons of cards off of your Necro, and then pitch those additional cards to those cards to either deal with bigger creatures to gain a bunch of life, so then you can kind of keep this Necro chain going. Or, even soul spiking your opponent for 4 while you're putting pressure on with something like a Grief. Just kind of things like that. They have some utility lands like Fell the Profane is like a removal spell that you can play, Bogart Trawler to get rid of graveyards. Just a lot of things kind of going on with this Mono Black deck, and honestly looks really sweet. And, I could only assume has a pretty good Bant Nadu matchup. So how did this game play out? And if you remember, if you watch my other videos and stuff, you'll know kind of who I picked to win the event and things like that. But first, game 1, Seth absolutely decimated Elie's board and hand in the first 2 turns of the game, thanks to an Inquisition on turn 1 into a Grief plus Flare of Malice to get rid of his creature. Essentially getting to Thoughtseize a card out of his hand, and then the Inquisition to get the last card out of his hand as well. Elie was able to reassemble thanks to Springheart and Nantuku plus Cord to hit to end up getting a 1-ring cording for 1 to go get a Haywire Might, to then use the Haywire Might to get rid of a ring that Seth had tapped out for, to deny him any kind of card advantage, and then from there Elie actually assembles a Nadu plus Outrider on core with roughly 1 million tokens in play to win game 1, which is really unfortunate because I figured Seth was ahead for like 95% of that game, and then you could just tell that the narrative shifted after the 1 ring just went away, and Seth just wasn't really able to reassemble or really get into a position where I think he was comfortable with being able to win the game. So we go to game 2. Again, this is a pre-boarded game. So Seth was on a mulligan to 6, still had a scam start, leaving Elie with just 4 lands and a Shuko. Elie draws multiple lands after being griefed. Just keeps drawing lands. And Seth continues to add pressure with a Bogart Trawler to try to close out the game. Elie continues to draw only lands, and Seth finishes the game with a Soul Spike to the face to win game 2, and split the pre-boarded games going into the sideboarded games. Where in game 3, both players mulligan to 6, and Seth had an early Inquisition to take Nadu, but Elie finds another one, with Seth seemingly having a slow start, but having the answer via March of Wretched Sorrow, plus 2 black cards to actually deal with the Nadu, gaining some life and potentially giving him more life to play with if we end up reaching something like a Necrodominance. Seth continues though to do nothing while Elie rebuilds with Dryad Arbor and Endurance to try and close out the game. Seth does find an answer for the Endurance, but with no follow-ups, Elie gets to and Elie getting an Urza Saga to then go enchant the construct with a Springheart Nantuku on the construct token, and then Elie is able to take game 3 just being a bad aggro deck and just playing lands and copying the construct token to essentially make them a lot bigger and put Seth on the back foot, taking it to a game 4. Now, game 4, both players keep 7. Seth does grief on turn 1, but does not have a Not Dead After All effect. Then on turn 2, Seth does the same thing, runs it back with a turn 2 pitch grief, but no Not Dead After All effect. Elie then commits a Halfling to the board along with a Saga on turn 2. Saga gets to make 2 tokens and produce a Shuko, while Elie then plays a Vexing Bauble, which essentially counters spells that don't have mana spent to cast them. Seth is able to play land 4 for Shieldred, but it's a little too late as Elie plays a Nadu on a board full of creatures and a Shuko, and down goes Necro. So, Elie getting to kind of do the thing in game 4 after just kind of being pretty middling aggro deck, which kind of is how both decks looked in the first few games where they were trying to win anyway, where it was just even though the Nadu deck got disrupted, they were able to kind of rebuild their board position and ultimately take down the match 3-1. Kind of like my wrap up of the match, kind of as I was watching it. Game 1 looked very promising for Seth. It's just kind of came up a little bit short at the end, a little unfortunate, but it kind of is what it is. You got to think that if you can find a Necro, that the games will play out differently. And how those games ended up actually playing out was Seth's mana being so awkward in games 3 and 4 that even when he did have a Necro Dominance, he couldn't deploy the Necro Dominance because of the Phyrexian Tower that only produces colorless mana, and you need a creature to sacrifice and be able to do it. And every time that he had a creature, he either needed that creature to beat down or, even if he did manage to get down a Necro Dominance, Elie at multiple points had Haywire Might and or Ibiseju to take care of a Necro Dominance, and just ultimately probably wasn't going to matter because Seth wasn't going to get a meaningful Necro trigger when he wanted it on his end step. So a little unfortunate. Elie ends up winning the match 3-1. Bant Nadu again taking down another deck. We're looking at at least 3 Nadu decks making the top 8 because we have Jason Yee and Samparty, which is the next match that comes up, and they're the only mirror match in the top 8. They're the only mirror match in the quarterfinals, excuse me. And, we'll kind of see how that match plays out, and unfortunately how most of these matches are going to play out in the top 8. So next we have Jason Yee and Samparty, which how all the quarterfinals played out, I believe they had all the matches play at the same time. So we actually got dropped into the start of game 3 for Jason Yee and Samparty, which they were tied at 1-1 going into the sideboarded games. Now, for those of you that have no idea how the Nadu mirror match goes, it's essentially a giant race with like the sideboarded games being kind of this, in a way being, finding when you need to be disruptive and finding out when you need to absolutely just race your opponent. It seems like if you're on the play, you're just trying to hurry up and assemble the combo with as much protection as you possibly can have and hope that your protection lines up with the interaction that your opponent has with your with what you are trying to assemble, whether it's having protection for the Nadu against things like Dismember, whether it's having backup copies of Shuko and not getting blown out by something like a Force of Vigor or something of that nature, being able to play around, counter spells. We actually saw a Swan Song from Jason Yee, and it actually does get played in one of the games where it does seem like it's kind of weird in a way. We saw Samparty playing something like Spell Pierce, where Jason decided to play something like a Swan Song for the fact that Swan Song is a hard counter versus the, technically conditional effect of something like a Spell Pierce. So we join in game 3. A little unfortunate, I know. Even though, again, it's just like a Bant Nadu mirror, and we're going to end up seeing at least one more in the next round of the semifinals. Still like to watch like all the games of Magic and really kind of understand the matchups and the things like that are going on. So Jason mulligans to 6. Sam has a Dork into Nantuku, while Jason has Grazer into Colony Garden. I believe Jason ended up winning game 2, so Sam is on the play for game 3. I really got better with my notes as I went on, as you can probably tell as we kind of keep going through this. So Jason goes Grazer into Colony Garden, which means that we have an 0-3 and an 0-1 with 2 lands in play. Actually playing like using the fetch land, because the Sam actually ended up playing a Yavimaya, so the fetch land was actually able to tap for green mana to save it for something like Springheart Nantuku later. Jason then plays another fetch land and grabs a Surveil land on Sam's end of turn 3 and keeps it on top. Jason does find a Shuko off the Malevolent Rumble, which is actually a new card. I guess some technology from Jason Yee, where you mill 4 cards, you put a permanent from among them into your hand, you put the rest into the graveyard, and you make a Scion. So, a Spawn. I guess it's not a Scion. And so it does pull double duty, where it is another creature that can be targeted by a Shuko or an Encore Outrider to then kind of like continue to loop with the Nadu. It can also end up generating you mana as well once you kind of get your targets out of it if need be. It also could technically, the Malevolent Rumble itself can technically get you to Delirium, so then your land that for whatever reason I cannot think of off the top of my head, but will definitely come up later, when you have Delirium, you can pay 4 mana and turn it into a permanent card in your graveyard. So this is like a way that you can also have access to more Nadus. If you mill one, you don't necessarily have to take it. You can leave it, and it also allows you to be a little bit more resilient to, just removal, for the fact that you can then just copy it. Your land can just copy the Nadu, and you can kind of do your thing. So Jason finds a Shuko off the Malevolent Rumble, but Sam finds one from an Urza Saga and has Summoner's Pact, but it gets met with a Swan Song. So the Swan Song actually coming up in Game 3 to counter the pact that presumably would go and get Nadu. Jason is able to produce the Shuko and an Urza Saga on their own, of their own, but no Bird Wizard, so just kind of in that weird holding pattern of trying to find a Nadu or find some card that can go and get Nadu, which is kind of the the crux or the thing that can happen when you're playing these creature combo decks is, even though you have a lot of redundancy, you can feel like you're waiting multiple turns to actually find one of those pieces to actually be able to produce your combo. Sam continues to pressure with a board full of tokens. Jason passes back and ultimately loses the game. No Nadu shenanigans going on. We just see Springheart and Nantuku just making a ton of 1/1 tokens, and Sam getting in there for 1 or 2 points on each creature, moving around his own Shuko to try to push a little bit more damage, and ultimately being able to send the last few points through to down Jason Yee and go up 2-1 in the match. So we go to Game 4. Jason keeps 7, or we both keep 7, and Jason leads on Grazer while Sam leads on Halfling. Jason follows up with a Malevolent Rumble, which card that continues to show up, and continues to kind of set up and posture and everything like that, while Sam plays Wall of Roots into Noble Hierarch. Jason then produces Nadu and Shuko, but only has Nadu and Grazer in play and finds a Springheart Nantuku plus a Dismember off the triggers. Jason goes off, finding multiple gardens to keep the cards coming along with a Dryad. Went from being a potential whiff to double Nantuku to close out the game, and that was all in that same turn. Like I was kind of thinking like, okay, well maybe we're done here, but finding those interactive cards plus finding some more lands to be able to play the Nantuku and to kind of make it deterministic at a point by getting the second one to close out Game 4, and just like that, we're in Game 5 where Sam gets to be on the play, and I think after watching as many matches of Bant Nadu as I've seen, definitely being on the play, pretty goated in the mirror match, if I do say so myself. Both players keep 7. Sam leads on the Noblest of Hierarchs on turn 1. Jason again plays Grazer, but puts a Surveillant into play for that extra value. Sam then goes for Wall of Roots into Urza Saga plus an Nantuku. Jason plays a Malevolent Rumble to get Shuko and passes with Swan Song up. Sam does have Shuko plus Nadu with a bunch of creatures in play. Sam goes off, finds a second Nantuku and a Teferi Time Raveler to just ensure that there's no way that Jason is able to interact and ultimately win the game, pushing Sam Party into the semifinals where he's going to face Elie Cassis in the Bant Nadu mirror. Who would have seen it coming? Watching this mirror match, I thought it was kind of nuts. Jason's deck I liked a lot, simply for the fact of the fact that like Rumble could do multiple things where it's going to get you a permanent card, so it's going to find you Nadu, it's going to find you Shuko, it's going to then put the other cards into the graveyard. You're going to be able to make a creature, so you're able to kind of more easily make more tokens as you go on, and in a pinch it's just more mana. It's technically ramping you, or it costs like 1 mana in theory. Just a lot of things going on in the build of Nadu that Jason was playing that I really liked, so hats off to them for that build and stuff, because I thought that was very creative. I really liked it. But, just wasn't enough to get past the mirror. Jason's deck was a lot more toolboxy, I would say, than Sam's. But Sam, played a great match. Definitely picked his spots to end up being able to win the games that, were actually possible to win, and just ultimately outplayed Jason in the top 8 and in the Bant Nadu mirror. So with that, let's go ahead. We'll talk about our last quarterfinal match and get ready for our semifinals. So Noah and Daniel's game is going to be pretty simple, so we'll kind of lump it in with the start of like the semifinal matches. So we get dropped in the middle of Game 5, and Noah is in the middle of casting a Pithing Needle to name Daniel's One Ring that has 3 counters on it, essentially trying to lock him out of being able to activate the One Ring, and then also dealing damage to Daniel so he can obviously not find another One Ring to reset it. So at this point, that's all Noah really has going on. His Thoughtseize in hand, I believe they were at like 6 life, something to that effect, going into that turn. and they have a Thoughtseize in hand. So, Pithing Needles the ring, passes the turn back to Daniel, where, Daniel ends up attacking with like the 4/4 Orc Army, putting Daniel down to 2, passing the turn, and, we're moving on. Noah ends up top decking a land, which is not going to do anything. Instead of trying to maybe play it to get cards out of the hand, whatnot, which is made awkward by the fact that Thoughtseize is in the hand, so we can't even play it unless we have a way to discard it without dying at this point. So top decks a land, decides to bluff some kind of removal spell. We end up going to Daniel's turn, where he moves a Shuko onto a Bowmaster, but then ends up drawing, has Summoner's Pact in hand, goes and gets a Nadu, goes and does a little bit of the Nadu stuff, ends up making a Springheart Nantuku, ends up making a ton of tokens, kind of doing the thing, stops in the middle of it to then attack for 4. Noah blocks with his 4/4 Orc Army, and then activates Castle Locthwain, putting a 3rd card into his hand, and ultimately losing the game off of the Castle Locthwain trigger, or I guess resolving the Castle Locthwain, to put the 4th Nadu deck in the top 4, and eliminating every non-Nadu deck in the top 8. I don't know where it went wrong. Nadu definitely did the thing, and unfortunately for the Nadu haters, aka me, Daniel ended up actually knocking out the number 1 seed in the tournament. I mean, Noah Ma was 15-1 going into the top 8. Granted, had a few buys at the end because they ended up getting to 36 match points before anybody else, but nonetheless was undefeated in Modern up to that point. And a virtually a 10-0 at that point, probably running hot enough to where you can make an argument that Noah probably would have won those matches anyway. But we are slated for a top 4 that has 4 Nadu decks in it, where we have Elie Cassis versus Sam Party playing a Bant Nadu Mirror, and then we have Simon Nielsen and Daniel playing a Bant Nadu versus 4-color Nadu matchup, and the first one that we actually got to see was Elie Cassis versus Sam Party. So I don't need to explain really the intricacies of the Nadu mirrors. Essentially, from what I've seen, it comes down to who can be pretty proactive or reactive at the right time, and basically who isn't afraid to go for it when the coast is, for the most part, clear or mostly clear. So game 1, both players kept 7. Elie is on the play because he's the higher seed and leads with Saga, while Sam has a Lush Portico milling a Court of Calling. Elie then goes wall into Noble Hierarch, and then Sam, on his turn, plays Volatile Storm Drake, which steals the Wall of Roots to be better set up for a Nadu plus a Shuko on his turn. Elie then gets a Haywire Might to presumably deal with a Shuko, produces another wall, and passes. Sam continues to set up by playing a Halfling. Elie picks up a Nadu, but only has 5 mana plus to produce Nandu plus Outrider Encore, and just passes the turn. Doesn't play either of them, just passes the turn. And that's key because there was only 5 mana that Elie had access to. If he had had the Wall of Roots, he would have had 6 mana, been able to play both, and presumably go off, because then that, at least with the Encore, you're able to do that at instant speed. So even if your opponent does have like a removal spell for a Nadu, they can only really stop like 1 trigger, while you just get to do it a bunch of other times. So only 5 mana, so Elie decides to do none of that, likes to presumably leave up something to be able to interact with what Sam's doing and kind of give him pause before potentially going for it. So it just passes back to Sam. Sam plays a Nadu and a Shuko with 4 creatures on play, finds a pack to go find another Nantuku, and eventually closes out the game. At this point, like, the players kind of know what happens like during this loop and what the kind of end board is going to lead to, and Elie ends up packing it in, and Sam ends up winning game 1. We go to game 2, and Elie is on 6 and leads with a Haywire Might. Sam leads on Halfling. Elie deploys a Shuko and has a 3rd land plus Nadu rolled up for his next turn, meaning that he's able to kind of start getting some activations in there, as well as having Nadu plus another creature to play, or another creature to target, to end up getting more card advantage. Sam has a decision to either play Teferi to bounce a Shuko, or play out some creatures and set up a Court of Calling. Sam then chooses to play Teferi after kind of tanking for a while and bounces the Shuko, passes the turn. Elie gets a Surveil from a fetch land and keeps a redundant Shuko and plays it on his turn. Sam sets up his turn 3 with a Wall of Roots plus Sun Cleanser, which doesn't really do much in this matchup in particular because it just stops things from having counters put on them and it removes all the counters. This is definitely for like the Jeskai control decks and whatnot, which essentially is kind of like a dead card at this point. It really only kind of helps support like Court of Calling and things like that. So, plays Wall of Roots, plays Sun Cleanser, passes the turn. Elie plays Nadu on turn 4, and Sam responds with an Evoked Endurance, plus a Court of Calling, with the Evoke plus the Shuffle trigger on the stack to get a Volatile Stormdrake, stealing Elie's Nadu. However, Sam, doesn't have a Shuko or an Outrider, so the game continues. Elie then chords for another copy on Nadu and starts to go off with 3 total creatures in play, where he finds more lands, plus another Nadu to reset the triggers, and then Sam concedes, and we're tied 1 game apiece in the pre-boarded games, going into the sideboarded games, into our first semifinal match. Where Game 3, Sam gets to be on the play, and he gets to start with a Sylvan Safekeeper on turn 1, not a very common turn 1 play from the Nadu decks, but obviously a turn 1 play nonetheless, where Elie leads on probably the more common play of playing a Delighted Halfling on turn 1. Sam then plays Wall of Roots, plus a Shuko, potentially able to go off next turn, while Elie plays a Nadu and passes with Force of Vigor up. Sam does play Nadu, and Elie waits to cast Force of Vigor on Shuko after is already able to get a Nadu trigger. So this is kind of like a key turning point in that match, because the Force of Vigor could have been played on the Shuko with the Nadu on the stack. So this could have been a way that, there could have been 0 Nadu triggers, and then Elie's able to untap and then end up actually winning the game. Doesn't seem like a big deal at the time, just 1 Nadu trigger. But Sam ends up being able to tank on whether to play a Pact, to go get an Nantuku and attempt to go off with Safekeeper, which is a little bit more dangerous because obviously you need lands to do so, and you're essentially going to hit lands, and then you're going to have to sacrifice them and whatnot to then be able to target your tokens and things like that, and it gets a little messy from there. But after Sam tanks, figures that I probably don't have another turn. Either I'm going to die to Elie's board, or I'm going to die because I cannot pay for a Summoner's Pact, what have you. So just ends up, playing it out. Tanks, goes and gets ends up going to get a Nantuku, tries to go off. Sam finds Chord and fetch lands and is able to make enough tokens to Chord for Outrider to win the game. And from that, Elie feels like he kind of gave the game away, allowing that trigger to happen, because that one land made all the difference in, potentially having enough mana and enough things to do and enough lands to sacrifice to kind of keep the train going, find a Nantuku to then end up hitting enough land drops to eventually make enough tokens to be able to Chord and win the game outright. From there, just seeming like a misstep. Another thing that you could point to where it's that lost a player a game and could potentially cost Elie the whole semifinals as it stands. Where Sam gets to go up 2-1 on Elie, and presumably gets to play a game 5 on the play, which is where you want to be in a lot of most mirror matches, and I'd assume in the Bant Nadu mirror match that's exactly where you want to be. So we go to game 4, and Elie gets to lead on a fetch land for a Portico, while Sam plays a Shuko. Elie then goes Wall of Roots into Shuko and can deploy Nadu next turn and generate some value. Not necessarily win, but definitely can get some value out of the Nadu. It does get met with a Dismember, and both Nadu triggers find lands. So he does play Nadu, gets a Shuko trigger, and then Sam does target it down with a Dismember, which then Nadu gets an additional trigger. So, value. Value from our Bird Wizard friend. Sam misses on a land drop on turn 3 and just plays a Shuko and passes. Elie, on Sam's end step, cracks some fetch lands to deck thin, plus looking for a Nadu, or Chord or Pact at this point, to essentially find another Nadu to be able to attempt to go off again. Elie is able to Force of Vigor both of Sam's Shukos and makes Nadu with a Shifting Woodland, with the one that was dismembered earlier being in the graveyard. Elie finds an Nantuku in 2 lands, so is able to cast it and finds a fetch land after playing the Nantuku and start kind of the combo, and ultimately giving Elie the win in Game 4 and forcing a Game 5 where, again, Sam Party gets to be on the play, I think, in a very crucial game where, again, you're in a mirror where you want to either be super aggressive in trying to assemble the combo, or you want to be reactive. And again, I think Sam just being on the play, focusing more on assembling the combo rather than, being like reactive, or just being able to be reactive by proxy, and then also being able to set up future turns where Nadu is going to end up being fantastic. Both players keep 7 for the final game, and Sam gets the lead on a Saga. Elie just plays a Windswept Heath and passes, no turn 1 plays from either player, while Sam goes wall, plays a wall and passes the turn. Doesn't do anything else with the wall. A very slow game for both players to this point, where Elie fetches and surveils another land in the graveyard, where he gets to untap and goes wall into Haywire Might and sacks the Might immediately to hit Saga before it's able to trigger to search for a Shuko. Sam just cracks a fetch and produces a Nadu on his turn, passes. Elie plays a Nantuku and gets a fetch land to make 2 tokens from the Nantuku, and Sam has a chance to win thanks to Cord getting Outrider. Sam goes Wall of Roots into Cord ×3 for the Rider and spins the wheel. Sam ends up finding a Nantuku with a bunch of fetch lands in play after almost whiffing, potentially losing the game on Elie's turn, and Sam correctly going for it, getting a little lucky and hitting the cards that he needs to actually win the game. And Elie just concedes, meaning that we have Sam Party winning 3-2 and being 1 win away from being Pro Tour Modern Horizons 3 champion. And this is where my opinions start to change, because the mirror is kind of a nightmare, where there's just a lot of kind of these next level plays that I don't think a lot of players would think about, like when Sam took Elie's Wall of Roots with a Volatile Stormdrake. That's just kind of a heads up play that, I certainly wouldn't have had that on my radar. I would not have been, someone to kind of do that sort of thing. I would have definitely be kind of zeroed in on this is going to take a Nadu if my opponent tries to play a Nadu, and then I'm going to be able to kind of go off from there because I'm going to have my own plus Shuko and things like that. So definitely some really interesting plays that happened in the mirror, but oh my gosh, does it look like a nightmare to play against. Where it's either going to be a straight up racing situation where neither player is going to look to interact anyway meaningfully, or one of the players is going to try to interact while the other player tries to kind of race to the finish line. And if both of them play any kind of control matchup, God rest your soul, because that looks absolutely miserable. So definitely a deck that has a benefit of being disruptive while also just being kind of a straight up combo deck. Sam showing some very showing very well that he knows how the matchup goes and what you need to do to actually be able to win. And something I kind of thought of, while I'm watching the Pro Tour, is that Sam and Seth Manfield both made the top 8 of Pro Tour Murders of Karlov Manor, where Sam lost in the quarterfinals and Seth went on to win the event. And Sam Pardee has a chance to then win a Pro Tour in which they both made the top 8, and Seth lost in the quarterfinals, and Sam Pardee ends up winning the event. Just something really neat. They were both also playing the same deck at that Pro Tour. This one, they're on 2 different decks. Some would say 2 polar opposite decks, for the format, but nonetheless, would be kind of a cool thing. Sam Party wins 3-2, gets a trip to the finals, and plays either 4-color Nadu or Bant Nadu in the finals of the event. Hey, you still following me here, camera guy? We still have 2 more potential Nadu mirror matches. We just need to figure out if it's going to be another Bant mirror match, or if we're going to play a 4-color versus Bant mirror match. So we'll try to go through this as fast as possible, because I know I'm a talker. This is going to be forever, but this is just the lengths that I'm willing to go to try and give as much of an in-depth and my own personal thoughts on what is going on here. So we have Simon Nielsen versus Daniel, last name I'm not going to pronounce. And we have, of course, 4-color Nadu versus the Bant Nadu. The 4-color Nadu deck is essentially playing like Bowmaster and like Thoughtseize and things like that. It's going to be a little bit more proactive, like with its disruption, and also should in theory, I guess, have a pretty decent like Jeskai control matchup, being that it has Orcish Bowmaster for something like the One Ring. So I mean, and technically, in a way, too, the Bowmaster gets to interact with Springheart and Nantuku as long as it's not bestowed onto another creature, which is definitely going to come up very, very quickly, and was actually a really cool line of play from the Pro Tour, which is kind of what you expect from, again, some of the best players in the world. So, Game 1, Simon is on the play, and he leads on Urza Saga versus Daniel's Delighted Halfling on turn 1. Simon then bestows his Nantuku onto his opponent's Halfling. For some people, that like to me, I'm thinking like, okay, well, I'm wondering what that does, because I'm assuming at this point, if Simon Nielsen, I'm assuming, isn't having a stroke at this point, and he thinks that that's his Delighted Halfling. I'm assuming that like when this happens, and as I'm watching this, that the Springheart Nantuku only triggers for when he plays a land. It's not going to trigger when his opponent plays a land. Then he's all of a sudden going to start getting tokens and whatnot. It's still going to trigger for Simon, just now it is protected. So now if Daniel wants to interact with the Springheart Nantuku, he's going to have to kill his own creature. And if he kills his own creature, then the Nantuku just comes into play, and it's underneath Simon's control and everything, and just kind of gets messy. So it's essentially like uber protected. Daniel's gonna have to set himself back in some development if he wants to have a chance at dealing with this Nantuku. Not to just deal with it, to have a chance of dealing with it. Daniel then plays Wall of Roots into a Shuko. Simon then uses Saga to go get a Shuko, floating the mana, then playing a fetch land to make an insect, to make 2 insect tokens and playing a Nadu. Daniel responds with a Bowmaster to ping a token as we attempt to go off. Simon then finds a fetch land to make even more tokens and continuing to find lands, and then Daniel just concedes the game. All done and easy. You found enough lands to make enough tokens. You have enough triggers and everything like that. The game is over. And that's who knows that was going to be how all these matches were going to end, or how these games, I guess, were going to end. Number 2. Daniel runs it back with Halfling on the play. Simon also liked his play from Game 1 and just leads on Urza Saga. Daniel then goes for Nantuku into a fetch land plus Halfling, while Simon plays and cracks a fetch land and plays a Wall of Roots into a Halfling. Daniel plays a fetch land and makes more tokens and plays an Adu, then chords for Outrider, and thankfully Simon doesn't make Daniel play it out. Super easy, knows that there's probably enough stuff going on where, the Outrider on core and being able to do it at instant speed as well. So if there even was any interaction from Simon, he wasn't going to be able to do it meaningfully. His opponent was just going to be able to go off past it. So blazing through the first 2 games, thankfully, because again, like after watching like the third mirror match, it ends up getting kind of ridiculous. Game 3, Simon and Daniel start with Halfling, with just a busted start, I guess. Simon then goes Wall of Roots into Bestow Nantuku onto his Wall of Roots. Daniel just plays a second Halfling and passes with mana up. Simon plays a land and then chooses to copy his Wall of Roots instead of making a token, or instead of making 1/1 insect. Daniel plays a Bowmaster at the end step. So I'm assuming Simon probably read that there was more than likely a Bowmaster, which was then going to end up picking off a token, which I don't know if necessarily is like the worst thing for Simon, I guess, if that's what ends up happening. But at the same time, no reason to play into it, especially if you're not looking to really do anything else. You don't want to do anything else, just making a copy of the Wall of Roots instead of making a 1/1 insect, especially if you're putting your opponent on Bowmaster. It's just a very smart play and a very heads-up play, again, from probably one of the best players on the Pro Tour, even if they did have a very sloppy quarterfinals game. They're up 1-1 in, I guess, tied 1-1 in the semifinals. Untaps and then just plays the land and says go. So we go back to Simon's turn. Fetches, makes another copy of Wall of Roots, and mills an Urza Saga from the Surveil land that was played. Simon passes the turn, and Daniel decides to chord for a Nadu on the end of his turn. Simon lets him chord, ends up getting Nadu, and then Simon chords on his own end step after that has resolved for Stormdrake. He steals Nadu from Daniel, and then chords for Outrider with 6 total creatures in play, and then Daniel concedes the game. Putting Simon up 2-1 in the semifinals, and looking to close it out and punch his ticket to another Pro Tour Finals. We get to Game 4. Daniel leads on Delighted Halfling again. Probably one of the best plays. Simon is on 5 cards this time and just plays an Urza Saga. Again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Simon's hand is kind of stacked, though, all things considered. Has all the pieces for the combo, except there is no third land that is rolled up. So he's essentially sitting on a second land and then, like, Nadu, Shuko, and I believe a Springheart Nantuku as well. So, I mean, just, like, the best possible hand that you could have, like, on 5 cards. Just absolutely nuts. Maybe minus, like, not having a Shuko, like, the fact that he has a redundant Shuko isn't, like, super relevant, but, I guess could technically come up. So Daniel goes and gets a breeding pool off of a fetch land and just plays a Nadu on turn 2. Just plays a 3-4, says go. Simon draws his third land and then plays his Nantuku. Daniel, unfortunately for Simon, does have the Outrider in hand and is just able to play it. And after some triggers, we find lands that allow Daniel to cast Nantuku. And then Daniel hits some more lands, and the game is over. Daniel winning Game 4, and we are moving on to Game 5 in the semifinals of Pro Tour Modern Horizons 3. Just to kind of like simplify that even more, Daniel played Nantuku on played Nadu on turn 2, and then just had the Outrider Encore in his hand and was able to play it alongside of the Nadu plus the Halfling, generating a bunch of triggers and things like that. So, typically Outrider is a card that ends up getting searched with like Court of Calling. You don't really ever draw like the Outrider. I believe there's like one of like few games I watch over the course of the entire weekend where if it featured Outrider Encore, like it was actually in a player's hand rather than being in the deck for Court of Calling. So Game 5, Simon's on a mold of 5 while Daniel keeps 7, and this looks very scary because I'm just waiting at Simon at this point to like punch through and actually win like the finals of a Pro Tour. Actually take one down after so many top 8s and stuff. So it already doesn't look good on a mold of 5 versus a 7-card hand from Daniel, where presumably, if you kept a 7-card hand, you're either going to be very reactive, and Simon is in no way going to be able to cobble together a combo or meaningfully interact with Daniel if he just has the combo all rolled up. So Simon plays a Portigo and keeps the card on top, while Daniel Thought Seizes on turn 1 and takes a Nadu, leaving Saga, Halfling, and Shuko in Simon's hand. Simon then plays Halfling and Shuko and the Saga and says go. Daniel plays a Surveil land and just passes the turn. Simon is in the Nadu waiting room and just plays a Noble Hierarch while Saga just keeps ticking up. Daniel plays a Safekeeper and says go. So far, like neither player, in Simon's defense, on a mold of 5 and just a Nadu away from winning the game. And Daniel's just playing land go against a deck where he really needs to either find another way to kind of like interact with the board, like a removal spell, something of that nature, or start producing Nadus of his own and then finding like Shuko's Outrider Encore and just kind of generate value. Even if it doesn't necessarily win the game on the spot, just to find one of those cards so that you can eventually get to a point where you can win the game. So Simon top decks Summoner's Pact and tanks whether to activate Saga or float. Decides to float mana, it gets a Haywire Might. Decides to get Nadu with the Pact and starts to go off as Simon finally punches his ticket to the finals, doing what these creature combo decks are meant to do, and just top deck one of your pieces to go get one of the pieces to then end up winning the game, and that's exactly what happened. And at this point, my mental state has completely deteriorated because these mirrors are getting miserable. I'll be so happy when this deck isn't legal anymore. Also, Simon turns out to be a pretty good Magic player, as it turns out. Potentially a Kaibude Player of the Year award winner, depending on how Worlds ends up going for Worlds goes for Simon. But nonetheless, here we have our final set. We have a Bant Nadu mirror in the finals between Sam Pardee and Simon Nielsen, where it's Team CFB versus Team Handshake, which has kind of been the story all year at the Pro Tour. And they're going to go hash it out after Team Handshake ended up losing to Team CFB in the finals of Pro Tour Merge at Karlov Manor. And we'll see if Simon can get revenge for his Team Handshake teammates, or if Sam Pardee is going to kind of crush their hopes and dreams and bring Team CFB home another Pro Tour Finals victory. So here we are. We have finally made it to the finals of Pro Tour MH3, where unsurprisingly, Bant Nadu has not only taken over the event, but took over the top 8, completely dominated the quarterfinals matches, putting all 4 copies into the semifinals, and now 2 copies into the finals. And we have Sam Pardee versus Simon Nielsen in the finals. Sam Pardee, has played 2 Bant Nadu mirror matches already, while Simon Nielsen had to take down Jeskai Control, which is arguably a very tough matchup for him, and also having to take down 4-color Nadu as well. So I guess technically having to play 3 different matchups, even though 4-color Nadu and Bant Nadu are, to me, virtually the same deck. So let's get into it. Game 1, Simon is on the play because he has the higher seed, and has quickly assembled Nadu and Shuko along with a Sylvan Safekeeper to protect Nadu. Sam opts to play a Nantuku plus a fetch land, which leads to a Chord for a Drake, which then gets met by the Safekeeper activation to kind of take Simon off of as many lands as possible. He did have to cast a Summoner's Pact to be able to go and get the Nadu. So he ends up having to pay for the Pact. Doesn't end up mattering because he ends up having enough mana left over still to play an Nantuku, and then hits enough lands to make enough creatures for Sam to concede the game. And very quickly, Simon goes up 1-0 in the finals of the Pro Tour, and we head to game 2 very quickly, where Sam is on a Mold 6, and he bridges a Noble Hierarch on turn 1, while Sam leads on Saga with lands, Nadu, Nantuku, and Shuko in hand. Sam then goes Halfling and Shuko and is just waiting on a Nadu, while Simon plays a land and then plays a Haywire Might to interact with Sam's Shuko. Sam surveils on Simon's end step and then finds a Haywire Might to take out to take out Simon's Saga. Sam finds a Haywire Might to take out Simon's Saga. So many S's. Simon just plays a land. So Sam then plays a second Shuko, setting Simon way behind after taking out his Urza Saga with a Haywire Might. So Simon essentially took a play where he was going to get a Haywire Might so he could interact with the Shuko, to where even if Sam had Nadu, he wasn't going to be able to target anything for free necessarily, and was going to have to find another copy of Shuko. But Sam completely blowing that out by getting rid of Simon's 1 land, which was an Urza Saga, and then also producing a second Shuko, which, the Haywire Might cannot answer the second Shuko, can only answer the first one. Simon just plays a land and then plays an Nantuku. Sam misses on a Nadu, so he just continues with another Delighted Halfling, and double Shuko beats, of course, with the Exalted from the Noble Hierarch. So, attacking for 4 points of damage each turn. Simon plays a fetch land and gets 2 insects, passes. Sam again misses on a Nadu, drawing another Halfling, and is holding a Beseiju as well. Sam attacks, passes. Simon courts for an Outrider on the end step, and Simon untaps and slams a Nadu. Sam does have Beseiju for the Nantuku, but Simon does find Chord to then go get another Nantuku, and then Sam concedes the game, going down 0-2 in the finals of the Pro Tour, where Simon found himself in that spot against Javier in the quarterfinals, where he was down 2-0, and then ended up coming back with the reverse sweep. So definitely not out of the realm of possibility. We have seen it at least once in this tournament by Simon. I doubt that he would let it happen, but you never know. I don't think Javier wanted it to happen to him either, and this is where we're at now. So go to game 3, sideboarded games. Both players keep 7 for what is hopefully the last game, and I wrote sorry Sam, even though it's not like I said it out loud until right this second, because I was just basically tired of watching Nadu mirrors. I already saw Sam flex how good he is with the deck, so I can only assume that this was going to end up going the distance some way, somehow. So both players keep 7. Sam gets the lead on Safekeeper versus Simon's Saga plus Haywire Might. Sam then punishes Simon by playing his own Haywire Might and exiling his Saga, just leaving Simon with a Haywire Might in play. Simon then plays a second Saga and just passes the turn, so no way to activate the Haywire Might on his board, while Sam gets to play a Nantuku plus a fetch land and holding 2 Chords in hand, so then getting to make 2 insect tokens with the Nantuku thanks to the fetch land. Simon goes Wall into Halfling and then passes the turn. Sam cracks his fetch land for a Surveil land, and then mills a land and makes a token. Sam gets to untap and then plays a Saga, tanks for a minute, and then courts for 3 for a Nadu, and then deploys a Shuko. Simon uses the Haywire Might to destroy the Shuko, and Sam resolves a few triggers thanks to Shuko's activation and a Safekeeper activation as well. Sam is then able to play a second Nantuku and hit running lands to win Game 3 and go on to combo with the Sylvan Safekeeper, which is pretty dangerous a lot of the time because then you're just left with 0 lands, but when you're able to have multiple Nantukus in play and you're just able to hit lands, you're just going to kind of keep it going until you can find a Shuko or even like an Outrider Encore. So Sam not getting swept, winning Game 3, and quickly moving on to Game 4, where Simon's hand is absolutely stacked. I'm talking like has the combo in hand, and I believe he also had ways to protect it as well, which is like absolutely sickening, where it basically wasn't going to matter what Sam does. So having the whole combo in hand plus the lands needed to play them, Sam does play a Safekeeper and has 0 interaction for Simon. So it's like the absolute worst case scenario for Sam. Just no interaction for what Simon has going on, and Simon just literally having the whole combo rolled up in hand. To top it all off, too, as if Simon's hand couldn't get any better, he picks up a Dismember as the draw step as well. So even if for some reason Sam was able to interact with what Simon had going on, Simon also has a little bit of interaction now for Sam, which would probably be one of the ways that Sam could actually come back and win this game, just from, again, looking at the hands and just instantly knowing that Sam is in a lot of trouble. Sam does follow it up by drawing his own Dismember, though, on what could have possibly been the last turn to play it if Simon had chosen to go for the win, and more than likely probably would have went for it. But Simon does end up using his Dismember to take out a Sylvan Safekeeper, which, I guess could be really bad for him if he tried to take out a Nadu with it, because Sam tried to do the same thing to him, and it really didn't work out all that well after getting a Nantuku Besaged. But nonetheless, Simon then, dismembers the Safekeeper, no more protection and no more technically free targets from the Safekeeper for all these Nadu triggers that could potentially come down. Simon does float mana with his Saga that goes to Chapter 3 instead of making a Construct, decides to grab Haywire Might, and then Simon plays a Nadu and goes to equip Shuko, which means that Nadu ends up eating the Dismember, which then is going to net him his second trigger from, the Nadu triggers and things like that. Simon passes with a Nadu and a Pact in hand, so even if, they're able to interact with what's going on, there's a Nadu in hand, then there's also a Summoner's Pact that can go get a Springheart Nantuku, which then means that we can kind of try to go off and attempt to win the game from there. Sam plays a Saga and plays a Nadu, tapping him out, passes the turn. Simon uses both of his fetch lands to grab a Surveil land and a Dryad Arbor. Simon then untaps, plays a Nadu, and finds a land from one of the triggers, packs for an Nantuku, and then finds a second copy to lock it up and force Sam to concede the game, and winning Simon his first Pro Tour, I don't know if ever, but definitely in a while, after top 8ing like however many Pro Tours and being to the finals, finally able to close it out at Pro Tour Modern Horizons 3, winning against Sam Party 3-1, and ultimately wrapping up one of probably the most toxic modern environments that we've seen in quite a long time. So basically my post-match notes after this, I'm overwatching the Nadu mirrors. They're certainly interesting. If you haven't seen them play out, and watching one or two of them is kind of interesting to see how the players react and how they're able to play. But the fun wears off after the second or third match, And I just want to say a special thank you to all the top 8 competitors. I guess a congratulations to the top 8, not really a thank you, but congratulations to all the top 8 competitors, and a special congratulations to Simon Nielsen. It turns out it was his birthday today, as this video is going up. It was his birthday, and ended up actually winning the Pro Tour and everything with probably one of the most busted modern decks ever conceived. I would say probably at this point certainly top 5 with what it's able to do and what it's done, and probably one of the best Pro Tour performances of a deck as a whole, probably ever. Like, really, the only knock on the Nadu deck is that it wasn't the 1 seed going into the top 8, but it had, 5 copies in the top 8, and then had, every other match outside of the quarterfinals was all Nadu. So, I mean, I would say probably one of the best tournaments for a deck in quite a long time, I would think, especially even given the kind of metagame share that it had. So some final thoughts. And I think what everyone's thinking of, Nadu is absolutely busted. I mean, this card in this deck is just so consistent. It's very powerful. The fact that it has an instant speed way of winning the game, and then it just has a sorcery speed way of winning the game. The sorcery speed way can be found off of Urza Saga, which then makes tokens, which gives you something to target with the thing that you can go get with the Saga, and just continue to do things. And like playing the deck and like imagining playing the deck, like, hurts my head with all the different things that you kind of have to account for and think of, and at the same time, like, how brain dead it could possibly be, where your opponent just like taps out and just says go, and then like you untap and then just kill them, and they don't even know they're dead, and they don't even technically die the turn that you combo unless you're playing Thassa's Oracle, because then you just like blow up all their lands, and then you blow up all their lands, you bounce all their permanents, you pass the turn, and then you just have an infinite army essentially of 3-4 endurances, and it's just absolutely insane, just completely nuts. I'm over the Nadu mirrors. I'm already over the Nadu decks. I don't think that there's going to be like a super emergency ban, just because I think Wizards is going to wait. Hopefully not until August. I would like it to be done before the RCQ season even starts, but I think the sooner the better at this point. I think, I don't think the metagame is going to adjust enough to where, an almost 60% win rate for just the Bant version, like a 56% win rate for the 4-color version, is necessarily a place where you want to be. And like, even if it goes down to like, a few percentage points, where like it is like 55% and 56%, different from like 59-60%. The answer is obviously yes, it is kind of a difference, but is it enough of a difference to warrant like keeping the deck legal? I don't really think so, and I really don't believe like that line of thinking. I think something from the Nadu deck has to go. More than likely, it is going to be Nadu, the bird wizard himself, but there's also been times where Wizards has taken the play of just like banning cards like around it, so we could see like Shuko go, maybe I guess Urza Saga, or we could see like Outrider on core, but I think ultimately you have to go with the Nadu and just kind of leave it at that. Coverage is fantastic, with all the Bant Nadu mirrors and stuff going on. They were still very entertaining, having a lot of fun with like what was going on, and just kind of like of the absurdity that was kind of happening like on camera. So like kudos to all of them. Overall thoughts on Modern. In a world without Nadu, the format's probably as great as it's ever been. Whether you love or hate Horizon sets and like the kind of like rotation, the artificial rotation they kind of create when sets like this come out, with some of the decks that I'd seen perform at the Pro Tour that did very well, things like the Mardu and Boros Energy decks, the Necro decks, and then like the Jeskai Energy, just being a few of the ones that I was very impressed with throughout the weekend. We have seen some people playing Murktide that had done pretty well. Goryo's Vengeance, Matt Sperling was 10-0 in Modern with that deck and ended up being 9th on Breakers. So there was potentially another deck that could have ended up getting into the top 8. We could have seen just 4 Nadu decks versus, a Goryo's Vengeance, 2 Necro, and a Jeskai Control. But like ultimately, going forward, if you're playing against Bant Nadu and you don't want to play a mirror, Jeskai Control is probably your best bet. Because again, like I feel like Javier just lost as many games because of himself and just how the deck performed versus, games that he actually just lost the game because he was either outplayed or things didn't line up right or made like a wrong decision and whatnot. So definitely going forward, I think Jeskai Control is going to be a great option. Bant Nadu is going to be Naduing things. And if money is not an object and you're able to play whatever deck you want, probably just play Nadu until it gets banned and then just keep jamming it up until that point, because I definitely unfortunately see them probably waiting a little too long, and we're going to see a lot more results and kind of like a necessarily like a dead format until we see it banned, and then we'll kind of see what actually rises to the top, and I think we'll actually get a pretty sweet metagame. Lastly, Ruby Storm would have been a totally bad call because it had like a 33% win percentage, and that was even with some of the best players in the world who are well versed in Storm playing the deck as well. So turns out wasn't a very good decision. Nadu was the better of the two combo decks to register and play. So that's going to do for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed. A super long one. So again, if you made it all the way to the end, you're awesome. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing. Easy way to support me and my content as we try to get to 1K subscribers. And we close out Pro Tour Modern Horizons 3. And I look forward to doing this for Worlds that's going to be happening later this year. And maybe if we can even do it for the RC, that would be pretty sweet too, getting some stats and things like that going. So yeah, that's going to do it for me this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.